I want to begin this message by simply stating just 2 months ago in November of 2018, I enrolled in the Birmingham School of Flight at the Birmingham International Airport in Birmingham, Alabama. It takes a minimum of 40 hours for a particular individual to receive their private pilot's license. However, the national average is between 50 and 70 hours, contingent upon how long it takes for the individual to comprehend the information in order to fly the aircraft. It is quite interesting to note that at this particular moment in time, I have 5.5 hours inside of the air. 5.5 is a long way from 40. 5.5 is a long way from 50. 5.5 is a long way from 70. I'm not where I want to be, but I thank God that I'm not where I used to be. Because after all, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. There is somebody in here under the sound of my voice. You have big dreams, big goals, and big aspirations in 2019. The problem is not that you dream. The problem is that many of our dreams are stifled by discouragement. The question has to be raised, why are we discouraged? Many of us are discouraged because you've calculated the time that it takes to fulfill your dream, and the time does not work out in your favor. Because the time doesn't work out in your favor, you think that it's too late to start the business. You think that it's too late to start the 501c3. You think that it's too late to write your book. You think that it's too late to accomplish your dreams. You think that it's too late to accomplish your goals because the time does not work out in your favor. I want to pause to speak to everybody who has big dreams, but you also have big discouragement. Whenever you calculate the time that it takes to fulfill your dream and the time does not work out in your favor, always remember this. If you plan on living that long anyway, you may as well have something to show for it. I'm going to say it again. If you plan on living that long anyway, you may as well have something to show for it. It is not too late for you to go back to school. It is not too late for you to write your book. It is not too late for you to get your business off the ground. It is not too late for you to do whatever it is that God has placed inside of your heart in 2018. I dare you to elbow your neighbor and tell your neighbor it's not in your favor, but it's not too late. That was the wrong person. I need you to find somebody else and tell them it's not in your favor, but it's not too late. The training aircraft that I'm training on is in fact called a Cessna 172. It's a little bitty plane. It's called a Cessna 172. What amazes me is that the first time I set foot inside of the Cessna 172, I'm absolutely amazed because when the plane is on the ground, you cannot turn the plane with your hands. But when the plane is on the ground, it requires you to turn the plane with your feet. You're going to get it in just a minute. I'm going to say it again. When the plane is on the ground, you cannot turn the plane with your hands. When the plane is on the ground, it requires you to turn the plane with your feet. Cessna 172s have what it is that they call a yoke. A yoke is the airplane's equivalent to the car's steering wheel. They also have a rudder. A rudder is the airplane's equivalent to the car's foot pedal. It is quite interesting to note that when the plane is on the ground, you cannot turn it to the left and you cannot turn it to the right while using the yoke. You cannot turn it to the left nor the right while using your hands. The only way to get the plane to turn to the left and the only way to get the plane to turn to the right, it requires you to press the rudders. If you press the right rudder, it's going right. If you press the left rudder, it's going left. It requires you to use your feet. Come here, somebody. There's somebody in here under the sound of my voice. You've been declaring by faith that in 2019, my life is getting ready to turn. You've been declaring by faith that in 2019, my job's getting ready to turn around. In 2019, my bills are getting ready to turn around. In 2019, my finances getting ready to turn around. In 2019, my relationship is getting ready to turn around. But can I pause to tell somebody that hands represent my work, but my feet represents my walk. So many of us are claiming that my life is getting ready to turn, and the problem why your life is not turning, it is not because you ain't putting in the work, but whenever you put in the work but you don't walk right, you still in the same spot. I wish somebody could hear what I'm saying. I'm gonna say it again. The reason why many of our lives have not turned around, it is not because you have not put in the work, but anytime you put in the work but you don't walk the way that God intends for you to walk, you are still in the same spot all at the same time. I really believe that that's the reason the Bible declares in Psalms 1, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates both day and night, and he'll be like a tree that's planted by the rivers of water that brings forth his fruit in his season. His leaf won't wither, and whatever he does shall prosper, not because of how he works, but because of how he walks. And I wonder if I could get about 200 or 300 people in here on tonight who can pray this prayer to God. Lord, thank you for giving me the drive to work, but in 2019, I need you to help me to walk like you. Thank you for giving me the passion to work, but in 2019, I need you to help me to walk like you. I don't want the tongue in my shoe to not line up with the tongue inside of my mouth. If I say it with my mouth, I need to be walking in the same direction. Lord, I need you to help me walk. What amazes me, ladies and gentlemen, is that whenever you find yourself in a Cessna 172, it's a small airplane. And before you take off, there are two things that take place. The first thing that takes place, I did this about 2 weeks ago, it like to scared me to death, is that you have to call the air traffic control tower. It scared me to death, and the reason it scared me to death because it's almost like speaking a foreign language. Skyhawk 19775, Skyhawk 19775, and you really don't know what you're saying. You're just saying what the instructor telling you to say, but you really don't know what you're doing at this particular moment in time. You have to call the air traffic control tower, not a air traffic control tower. You have to call the air traffic control tower. I wish somebody could hear what I'm saying. I'm gonna say it again. If your takeoff is going to be successful, you have to call the air traffic control tower. In other words, you cannot take off until you get in touch with a higher power. Wish somebody could hear what I'm saying. I'm going to say it again. You cannot take off until you get in touch with a higher power. So many of us have been working, but you still ain't took off yet. Many of us have been working, but your dreams are still on the ground. Many of us have been working, but your goal is still on the ground. Many of us have been working, but your vision is still on the ground. And you sitting up here looking at me strange, like you don't have any dreams, like you don't have any goals, like you don't have any visions. But is there anybody in here under the sound of my voice who can attest to the reality that in 2019, I promise, it's big things popping and little things stopping? I say it out of my mouth, but what happens when I'm working but I'm still on the ground? The reason you can work but still be on the ground, I want to ask you this question. When was the last time you prayed? When was the last time you got in touch, not with a higher power? When was the last time you got in touch with the higher power? When was the last time you talked to God? When was the last time you woke up this morning with your mind stayed on Jesus? Is there anybody in here who can attest to the reality? I don't just need to talk to God when I come to New Rising Star. I need him on Monday. I need him on Tuesday. I need him on Wednesday. I need him on Thursday. I need him on Friday. I need him on Saturday. I need him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Somebody shout, I need him. First thing you got to do is get in touch with air traffic control. You cannot take off, can't take off until you get in touch with the higher power. Second thing that has to take place whenever you get ready to take off, you got to choose the right runway. I've been flying airplanes, but I've never been in flight school. As a consequence, I look at airplanes totally different at this particular moment in time. I always thought that they chose the runway that was most open and most available. I know you thought that too, but can I pause to tell somebody they do not choose the runway that is most open, although it has to be open in order to take off. They choose the runway that's going directly into the wind. Somebody gonna get it in just a moment. I'm gonna say it again. They choose the runway. Airports have several different runways, and the way they pick the runway is not according to the runway that is most open. The way they pick the runway is according to the runway that flies directly into the wind. That really doesn't mean much to you until you come to the understanding that when you're flying into the wind, it's not a tailwind beneath your sails, but when you're flying into the wind, it gives you resistance. I wish somebody could hear what I'm saying. I'm gonna say it again. When you fly into the wind, it's not a tailwind to your sails, but when you fly into the wind, it gives you resistance. And physics states that the more resistance you have, the more lift it gives the plane. Woo! God Almighty, I wish somebody could hear what I'm saying. Is there anybody in here under the sound of my voice, you've experienced some resistance in 2018? And you've been asking God to take away the resistance. But the problem is you trying to take off. And what God is saying, I can't lift you without the resistance. So instead of you asking God to take away the resistance, is there anybody in here under the sound of my voice who can take 30 seconds and say, Lord, thank you for the resistance. Lord, thank you for the resistance in my family. Thank you for the resistance in my body. Thank you for the resistance on my job. Thank you for the resistance inside of my life. Were it not for the resistance, you wouldn't be able to pray like you pray. You wouldn't be able to fast like you fast. You wouldn't be able to worship like you worship. I think it'll take 30 seconds and tell God, thank you. Come on, tell him, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you for the resistance. It's the resistance that causes you to take off. What amazes me is that the first part of the takeoff is called a climb. Let the church shout the climb. You're climbing up into the air. You got to climb at 10 to 15 degrees, because if you get any higher than 15 degrees, the airplane is going to stall at that particular moment in time. It is during this climb that you climb to your altitude. I've never gone higher than 3,500 feet, but when I get to 3,500 feet and I get to my altitude, you level out the plane. And when you level out the plane, Cessna 172s don't have this, but more advanced planes have something called autopilot. A Cessna 172 doesn't have autopilot, but it does have a knob called trim that performs the same function as the autopilot. So when you get to the height that you were trying to get to, you turn the trim button, and when you turn the trim button just right, you don't have to steer the plane flies by itself. I'm gonna say it again. When you get to that particular altitude, you turn the trim button, and when you turn the trim button just right, you can take your hands off the yoke. You can take your hands off the plane's equivalent to the car's steering wheel. You don't have to touch it, because now the plane is able to fly by itself. And the only reason you get from where you are to where you want to be is not because of your effort, but the only reason you get from where you are to where you want to be is because of the plane's effort. The only reason you get from where you are to where you want to be is not because you're fighting the wind, but the only reason you get from where you are to where you want to be is because the plane is fighting the wind on your behalf. Can I pause to tell somebody that victory is going from where you are to where God desires for you to be? Victory is going from where you are to where God wants you to be. And the problem with many of us inside of the body of Christ, you think that you're going to get there because of your own human effort. And you don't even realize that the only reason you're making progress inside of your life, it wasn't you fighting the resistance, but it was God fighting the resistance on your behalf. It was not you fighting for victory, it was God fighting for victory on your behalf. Is there anybody in here under the sound of my voice who knows what it is not to even have to fight? But is there anybody in here under the sound of my voice who knows that the only reason at the end of 2019 you still got peace, sanity, and joy when you should have been crazy going cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs? It was God fighting on my behalf. Does anybody believe that he's a battle axe? Somebody shout, in the time of trouble. Does anybody believe that he still fights battles? Does anybody believe that he's still making a way out of no way? Does anybody believe that he's still working miracles? Does anybody believe that he's still a way maker, a miracle worker, a promise keeper, a light in the darkness? Does anybody believe that he's still making a way somehow? Don't make me feel like it on tonight. The only people who can say the Lord will make a way somehow are those who had to depend on the Lord to make a way somehow. And if you've never had to depend on the Lord to make a way somehow, you really can't say the Lord will make a way somehow, because you don't know what it is for him to have to make a way somehow. But if you've ever had to stand and wait on God to make a way somehow, you can shout right now, God will. Woo! Somebody shouted, yes, he will. Such is the case in Exodus 14. Such is the case in Exodus 14. The children of Israel, who happen to be God's chosen people, find themselves in a battle. The children of Israel, who happen to be God's chosen people, find themselves in a fight. The children of Israel, who happen to be God's chosen people, find themselves in a precarious predicament. They've been in Egyptian bondage for 430 years. Exodus chapter 2, they got sick and tired of being sick and tired. They cried out to God. Exodus chapter 3, after they cried, God called Moses, because the call of God's leader is always connected to the cry of his people. Raised up Moses, sent him to the court of Pharaoh, and told Pharaoh to let my people go. Pharaoh has a hard heart. As a consequence, God sends plagues upon the land. First plague that he sent, he said, I'm going to turn the river into blood. His heart is still hard. And after he turned rivers into blood, I'm going to put frogs on the land. After the frogs, he said, I'm going to turn the dust into lice. After he turned the dust into lice, he says, I'm going to cover the land with flies. After he covered the land with flies, he said, I'm going to kill all the livestock. After he killed all of the livestock, the Bible declares he covered their bodies with boils. After he covered their bodies with boils, he covered the earth with locusts. After he covered the earth with locusts, he covered the earth with hail. After he covered the earth with hail, he covered the earth with darkness. After he covered the earth with darkness, he killed the firstborn inside of every house. And finally, Pharaoh let the children of God go. But although he let them go, what amazes me is that he pursues them. And you know, I got to thinking about that thing. Why did he go after them after he let them go? Because you remember, I told you on yesterday that when God got them out of Egypt, they didn't leave Egypt empty-handed, but they left bondage with all the spoils of the enemy. So when God gives you an exit out of your situation, he's not going to allow you to exit empty-handed. You're going to exit with all the joy you need, all the peace you need, all the money that you need, all the resources that you need in order to accomplish everything that God desires for you to accomplish. As a consequence, Pharaoh goes after the children of Israel. Is he going after the children of Israel because he still wants them under his control? Or is he going after the children of Israel because he wants their stuff? I believe it's a little bit of both. The enemy is after you because he wants control of your mind. But he's also after you because he wants to kill, steal, and destroy every blessing that God has dropped inside of your life. But aren't you glad that although Satan is after you, there are two twins called goodness and mercy that David talks about? He says, surely. He says goodness, meaning God gave me what I did not deserve. Mercy, meaning that God held back what I really did deserve. Mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. So although Satan is after me, God is after me. And aren't you glad that it may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by God? It may look like I'm surrounded by sickness, but I'm surrounded by God. It may look like I'm surrounded by death, but I'm surrounded by goodness. I'm surrounded by mercy. Is there anybody in here who can take 30 seconds and celebrate God that he's on my right, my left, my front, my back, under me, over me, and he's keeping me? Somebody shout, I am surrounded. Notice what happens. Notice what happens. This is what happens, ladies and gentlemen. He goes after them, and the Bible declares they come to a Red Sea. In Exodus chapter number 14, and at this particular moment in time, they got absolutely afraid because they're trying to gain victory, but they got a sea in front of them, and they got their enemies behind them. What do you do when you're afraid to move forward and you can't go backwards? What do you do when your future is getting ready to drown you and your past is getting ready to destroy you? And the Bible declares that he raises up Moses. He raises up Moses, and notice what he says to Moses. He says to Moses in Exodus 14, put it up so everybody can see it. He says, my victory is not in what I do. It's in what God has already done. I'm going to say it again. If you want the victory, it's not going to be in your effort. God is saying put it on autopilot. It's not going to be because you fight the win. It's going to be because God is fighting the win. My victory is not in what I do. My victory is in what God has already done. Exodus 14, verse number 14, Moses says you don't even have to lift a finger because the Lord is fighting for you. And sometimes the hardest fight is to fight myself not to fight. Sometimes the hardest fight is to fight myself to shut my mouth. Sometimes the hardest fight is to fight myself not to get involved. Sometimes the hardest fight is to fight myself to hold my peace. But can I let you in on a little secret? The Bible declares that you serve a God who neither sleeps nor slumbers. So if God never goes to sleep, ain't no sense in both of us not getting no sleep. I may as well go ahead and get me some rest. I may as well go ahead and have me some peace. God says, this fight you are not going to have to fight. I'm going to fight it on your behalf. As a consequence, you can put it in autopilot. Somebody shout autopilot. What amazes me is not that victory belongs to Jesus, ladies and gentlemen, but what amazes me is that when I'm confident in what Christ has already done, I can be at peace. See, the only reason that many of us are worried because of the fight, because I'm not confident in the finished work of Christ on the cross. The only prayer that God does not answer is the prayer that he's already answered. Why do you think that when he hung on the cross, he said, it's finished? And after he resurrected and ascended into heaven, wherever you see Jesus in the New Testament, he's seated at the right hand of the throne of his Father. He wouldn't be sitting down if he wasn't already finished. So everything that you need God to do, newsflash, he already did it. The Bible declares in 2 Peter chapter number 1 verse 3 that according to his divine power, he's already given you everything pertaining to life and everything pertaining to godliness. Have you not considered in Psalms 103 verse 2, David said, bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all of his benefits, who forgives all of your sins. He finished my forgiveness on the cross, who heals all of your diseases. He finished my healing on the cross, who redeems my life from destruction. He finished my redemption on the cross, who crowns you with loving kindness and tender mercies. He gave you a crown on the cross. And last but not least, who fills your mouth with satisfaction. Everything that you need God to do, he's already done it. As a consequence, when you are confident in the finished work of Christ, you can be at peace. It can be chaos all around you, but I ain't even worried about it. Folk going crazy on the job, but I ain't even worried about it. Because God is fighting on my behalf, and everything that I need, I already got it. I receive it, and I access it by faith. Somebody shout, it's finished. When you are confident of the finished work of Christ, you can be at peace. Question has to be raised, what does it look like to have peace? Anybody want to know what it looks like to have peace? First thing that I want you to understand is I'm at peace when I move forward despite uncertainty. Everybody repeat at me. I'm at peace when I move forward despite uncertainty. Exodus 14 verse number 15, it says, and the Lord said unto Moses, wherefore criest thou unto me? In other words, while you keep praying, speak to the children of Israel that they go forward. The water may surprise you, but it did not surprise me. The enemy may surprise you, but it did not surprise me. The future may surprise you, but it did not surprise me. The past may surprise you, but it did not surprise me. As a consequence, although you are uncertain about the future because water is in front of you, when you have peace, you can move forward in spite of uncertainty. When you have peace, you can move forward in spite of uncertainty. That's number one. Number two, when you have peace, ladies and gentlemen, I'm able to receive correction. Somebody shout correction. This a cuss word inside of the church. Don't nobody like the word correction. But have you not considered Exodus chapter 14, verse number 16? God says to Moses, lift up your rod. That really doesn't mean much to you until you come to the understanding Moses was a shepherd before he was a liberator. Every shepherd had a rod. They would use the rod in order to correct the sheep. I'm going to say it again. They would use the rod in order to correct the sheep. As a consequence, when he says, Moses, lift up your rod, after he says, you can hold your peace, I have peace when I'm able to receive correction. But what amazes me is that when Moses is a shepherd, the rod is used for correction, but when Moses became a liberator, the rod is now used for miracles. The same thing that corrects is the same thing that sets you up for a miracle, which means that you ain't ready for a miracle if you can't receive correction. God Almighty. I wish somebody could hear what I'm saying. I'm going to say it again. The same thing that corrects is the same thing that sets you up for a miracle. But quit talking about miracles on Monday in 2019. You ain't ready for a miracle until you can receive some correction inside of your life. If you don't need any miracles, you can sit down, be quiet, and go to sleep. If you don't need God to part a Red Sea inside of your life, you can sit down, be quiet, and go to sleep. But if you know you got some stuff inside of your life that only God is able to fix, that only God is able to make right, and you need God to work a miracle before 12 a.m. midnight, is there anybody in here who can shout, God, I need a miracle? I need a miracle, but I can't receive a miracle if I cannot receive correction. Somebody shout correction. I'm at peace when I receive correction. Number 3, I am at peace when I can praise God in spite of my problem. So he says, Moses, lift up your rod, but after you lift up your rod, stretch out your hands. After you lift up your rod, stretch out your hands. When I stretch out my hands, it is symbolic of praise. I don't want you to stretch out your hands after I give you the victory. I want you to stretch out your hands when the water is still in front of you. I don't want you to stretch out your hands after I get rid of your enemies. I want you to stretch out your hands when your enemies are still behind you. I don't want you to praise me after I pay your bills. I want you to praise me with unpaid bills. I don't want you to praise me after I manifest healing. I want you to praise me with a sickness inside of your body. I don't want you to praise me when your kids start acting right. I want you to praise me while your kids still acting crazy. Is there anybody in here who knows what the old folks said? Don't wait till the battle is over. I dare you to shout right now. I dare you to dance right now. I dare you to worship right now. I dare you to praise right now. Somebody shout right now. Somebody shout right now. I'm at peace when I can praise despite my problems. I want to give you a few things on how it is that I know that I got the victory, because now that I know that I got peace, the question is, how can I be sure that God's fighting on my behalf? How can I be sure that because he's fighting, I can kick it in autopilot? I don't have to do anything. Just let him fight my battles. God says, when you fight, I rest. He says, when you rest, I'll fight. How can I be sure of that? How do I know that I have the victory going into 2019? I'm glad you asked. When God grants victory, he will chop your problem in half. I'm going to say it again. I hope you can get this. When God grants victory, he will chop your problem in half. You frustrated because you're dealing with something that's too big for you. God getting ready to chop it in half. You frustrated because you're dealing with something that's over your head. God getting ready to chop it in half. All right, lest you think this eisegesis, show me that in the text. It says, Moses, lift up your rod, stretch out your hand, and when you stretch out your hand, that sea that you think is so big, I'm going to divide it in two. God Almighty. It's right there inside of the text. He says, lift up your rod, stretch out your hand, and when you praise me, what you thought was so big, I'm going to put it into bite-sized pieces. So you ain't got to deal with all of it at the same time, but if you just deal with it one step at a time, Yeah, I might not be able to see the end, but if I can just keep putting one foot in front of the other, if I can just keep waking up inside of the morning, if I can just keep rising and falling, I might not be able to deal with it all at the same time, but if I can deal with it step by step by step by step, I'm not where I want to be, but I'm not what I used to be, and I thank God that I'm on my way. Aren't you glad that God will chop your problems in half? He's fight number one when he chops my problems in half. Number two, when God grants victory, he lets me walk in my future without a trace of my past. So what amazes me is not that he parted the Red Sea. The Bible is emphatically clear that they walked across on dry land. Somebody shout dry land. Somebody say it again, dry land. That's absolutely important. Somebody say it again, dry land. Why is that important? Because normally the ground under the sea, if you were to take all the water up, it would be muddy. And because it would be muddy, as you're walking across a muddy ground, you would take tracks from your past into your future. But God is saying the reason I'm going to dry it all the way up. Somebody shout, he getting ready to dry it all the way up. You don't even realize I'm talking about your tears. He getting ready to dry them all the way up. He says, I'm going to dry it all the way up because I don't want you taking any traces of your past into your future. In other words, God says, when you cross this Red Sea, you ain't going to look like what you've been through. You ain't going to look like you ever been broke. You ain't going to look like you've ever been divorced. You ain't going to look like you've ever had low self-esteem. You ain't going to look like you've ever been down. You ain't going to look like what you've been through. Here's the last thing. When God grants victory, it's 11:59. I need you to get your phones out. Text star to 94253. Text star to 94253. You got a text message coming in just a second. When God grants victory, he drowns my enemies in overflow. Somebody shout, he'll drown your enemies in overflow. Somebody say it again. He'll drown your enemies in overflow. Pharaoh would have been all right if he had to let him go. But the Bible declares that when God chopped the sea in half, let him walk past it on dry ground. The scripture emphatically states they go past it, Pharaoh follows. So Pharaoh is in the middle of the sea. God causes the waters to come back down. In the same Red Sea that the children of Israel crossed is the same Red Sea that Pharaoh and his army drowned in. I'm going to say it again. The same Red Sea that the children of Israel crossed is the same Red Sea that Pharaoh and his army drowned in. This is the reason you got to be careful when you are jealous of other people. Because just because God let them cross it, don't mean that God getting ready to let you cross it. Is there anybody in here who can take 30 seconds and celebrate God? That when God grants you victory, he will drown your enemies. When God grants you victory, he will drown your problems. When God grants you victory, everything that sets you back, God's getting ready to drown you.